please fill the front rows first. I know everybody likes to sit at the back. Request the registration table to kindly send everybody inside. If they have not completed the registration, they can do it during the tea break. Okay. Welcome back, everybody, to the second day of the conference on delivering for nutrition, connecting the dots across system. I hope you all are well rested. I hope you enjoyed the first day, the keynote, the thematic sessions, and the learning labs, and our last plenary. And I hope you all are excited and all energized for a super exciting day 2. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce the session and invite the co-chairs for this session on the dais. This session is titled Research Showcase Connecting Dots Across Systems for Better Nutrition. This session focuses, has 4 presentations that are from the abstracts that we received during our call for abstracts, and these abstracts were the 4 abstracts that align with the theme of the conference, and that's why instead of a thematic session, we decided to showcase them in a research showcase session. The 2 co-chairs for this session are Dr. Renuka Silva and Dr. Diana Olney. Let me give a quick introduction and request them to please come on the dais. Professor Silva is the Chair, Professor of Nutrition at the Department of Applied Nutrition, Wayamba University of Sri Lanka. He has a PhD in Human Nutrition from the University of Reading, UK. He has built a distinguished research career focusing on food security, food literacy, school nutrition, and dietary assessments. He has held consultancy roles with the Ministry of Health and International Development Agency, currently leads research under the FRESH initiative aimed at enhancing sustainable diets through increased fruit and vegetable intake. Welcome, Dr. Silva. Our co-chair for this session is Dr. Diana Olney, who's the director of the Nutrition, Diets, and Health Unit at the International Food Policy Research Institute and leads the CGIAR research initiative, Fruits and Vegetables for Sustainable Healthy Diets, called FRESH. She serves on the leadership team for the Resilient Cities CGIAR initiative. She has a PhD in nutritional biology from the University of California, Davis, and has over 20 years of experience working in the field of international nutrition. Diana, welcome. Before I hand it over to the chairs, just a little bit change from what we did yesterday, because we heard that people were not able to view the screen. So I request all the presenters to come one by one, make their presentations, and go back so we don't block the screen. And during the Q&A session, request all of you to please come and take the seat here so all of you can take the session to questions. Over to you, Dr. Silva and Diana.
Hello? Okay. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning. Welcome to the second day of the Delivering for Nutrition conference, to this plenary session on connecting the dots. We have a really exciting session this morning, looking at things like food environments, ag nutrition interventions, and others, to see how we can work together to improve nutrition. So we won't take a lot of time. I heard yesterday there were some delays in the timing, so we'll be quick with our introductions to make sure that the speakers have adequate time to present. And Renuka and I will alternate introducing the speakers, just to give you a very quick introduction to the speakers and then let them take over. So our very first presentation will be by Vartika Singh, who is a senior research analyst at IFPRI. And the presentation is called An Inclusive Agri-Nutrition Transformation Pathway for India. So welcome, Vartika. Are you ready? Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It is my utmost pleasure to give the first talk in the research showcase session this morning. And I can keep talking until the slides are presented, so I can give some background already. The study that I'm going to present today, this is an inclusive transformation, sustainable transformation pathway for India. This is part of a larger study that we have been doing over the past few years on connecting the dots, essentially linking agriculture, biodiversity, food systems, and looking at an overarching systems transformation pathway. And I take the case study for India, but we've done this study globally and then for a few countries specifically. So I acknowledge the partners who have been a part of building all of this together, and as you will see moving ahead, it's an extensive suite of models that we've put together. And the key takeaway that I want you to take from this presentation in the morning is that all models are wrong, but some can be useful. So you can make all the criticism, and it's absolutely fair because models are developed based on some assumptions, but they sometimes help us find pathways or opportunities where some potential investments can be made. So we look at agri-food systems in India from 35,000 feet, and we've talked quite a lot about health outcomes and nutrition outcomes, but I want you to focus on two important things here, which is the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture sector in India, which is about 18% of the total greenhouse gas emissions that the food systems, agriculture, including livestock, emit in India, and 80% of fresh water use is for the production of rice and wheat. So we've heard a few things about cereal consumption, high levels of cereal consumption in Sri Lanka. India is not very far from it, so we are kind of on the same lines. And a small bit that I want you to focus on is also hidden costs for agri-food systems in India. This was developed out of the recent State of Food and Agriculture report by the FAO. It was launched last month and also in 2023. For India, we have seen that the food systems generate hidden economic cost to the tune of 1.17 trillion US dollars. This is PPP, purchasing power parity, equivalent to about 220 trillion INR. They are split into different components: social, economic, and environmental and health costs. And the largest share is due to health costs, is about 0.73 trillion. And compared to the total PDS budget, that was about 2.42 trillion INR in 2021. So the health costs are still quite a significant number. And this is not the case only with India, it's also for other lower middle income countries. And only look at the blue line, the blue bars, which is, so the pie is essentially social, environmental, and health, and the blue pie is the largest share of the total costs in India, so the health costs are still very significant, and same is the case with other lower middle income countries. And to also give a small example on that, I put up this burden of disease in India example, where burden of disease is calculated as disability adjusted life years. The formula is there, it's standard. This has been established by the Global Burden of Disease, and they estimate this once every few years, and accounting for population dynamics, risk factor exposure, and other things. And for India, consistently between 2009 and 2019, malnutrition is the topmost factor for the burden of disease. So how do we account for it? Can we look at an agri-food systems transformation pathway that can reduce some of these impacts? And precisely what we are trying to explore using this methodology. So a food systems economic commission was established almost 5 years ago. This was a commission set up of 15 commissioners, 3 co-chairs, with secretariat at EAT, which is famous or infamous for the EAT Lancet recommendations, the Potsdam Institute, and the Food and Land Use Coalition. So all of these institutes got together, and then there were technical working groups, but also commissioners leading other work. And bringing everyone together, we established a suite of models. So this is my khichdi figure, as I like to call it, because it has everything, and I'll take 1 minute to walk you down across all these different models. But I mean, it's not, I cannot present all of this aspect in a 12-minute slide. But the idea is that there is a land system model, which is linked to a food demand model, which is linked to a dietary health model. Then there's population and income projections, which is linked to a poverty model. Then there's, on the left side is a macroeconomy and energy systems, which look at energy systems altogether. And then there is a climate model that also integrates the climate aspects. So we put all of this together, ran a bunch of scenarios, and made simulation runs. I would still like to highlight that all of these are based on secondary data that are all open source and collected, and nothing has been like out of the researcher's own mind and curiosity. So we use this and develop multiple food system measures across diets, livelihoods, biosphere, production, and external factors, which is to say that food systems transformation do not just need to work within food systems, but also need to come from the outside. And for this presentation, I will only focus on the operational goal of healthy diets consumption. And to use it, we look at eradication of undernutrition, stabilization of obesity, convergence towards healthy diets, and halving food waste. So we look at these 4 different aspects within the operational goal. There are 14 indicators that we also measure as outcomes, and I will only focus on the health aspect, which is underweight population, obesity, and premature mortality reduction. So we use these models, set up these scenarios, and we look at some results. I'll just skip to this one. So there's like a bigger chart in the paper that I'm also happy to share later on. But just look at the row highlighted, which is this diets, which is to say if a lot of measures of food systems are put together, which includes focus on legume consumption, it includes focus on fruits and vegetable consumption, reducing overweight, reducing obesity, lowering food waste and everything, we will be very, there are like more greens than reds here, which means that we will be better off. There are the only big red is water, so there are some negative impacts on water usage for agricultural production in India, but overall we will be better off on multiple indicators. And I delve a little bit deep into this, which is the increase in consumption of pulses and oil seeds to some extent. So this bar is essentially diets, which this figure shows consumption of various food groups and how that would change over time by 2050. So if we increase the consumption of pulses, oil seeds, fruits and vegetables, and lower the consumption of sugars, also cereals, which is the lowest bar, we will be able to meet some food security, energy, calorie requirements of the population. This figure is on change in nutritional status of millions of people across normal weight and obesity. So the diets figure also shows that if we make strategic policy measures and investments towards reducing each of these aspects specifically, then we will be able to reduce the underweight population. The bar on the negative side of the 0 is essentially like we're better off because we're reducing by that number. And the bar on the side is, on the right side is the increase in population, which is normal weight, and the obesity is the magenta color, essentially. And this last bit is on change in years of lives lost. So we can see the last option, which is the last row, diets, which is about 20 million years of lives lost will be reduced by these measures. So this is the first set of results that we have. There are plenty of other results on the environmental aspects, such as water use reduction, nitrogen efficiency, and all of it, which I did not present here. And I would like to kind of conclude by saying that we look at 2 important aspects, which is premature mortality rates and years of lives lost can be reduced due to consumption of fruits, vegetables, and nuts. This modeling setup, which I also put out in my limitations, does not account for things like food choice because we are limited in our simulation analysis, and that is like one big limitation. But we also say that measures that focus on total calorie intake may not necessarily result in improved dietary quality. We also heard from Derek yesterday that we want to focus not only on simply calorie intake, but also focus on protein, energy, malnutrition. This is also suggested by some other studies. And by conclude that there are gains to be had when both science and policy silos converge. So in this specific analysis or in this expansive analysis, we've tried to bring together multiple streams together, which is, I would say, highlighting the theme and connecting the dots that we also look at agriculture, we look at environment, we look at external transformation measures as well. I did not present the results on external measures, but we've seen that nudges such as population growth, controls in population growth, increased per capita incomes, which also drive other socio-economic development, such as bioenergy, impacts on other energy sectors as well, have effects on the food system measures overall as well. And then the overarching need to say we need to develop tools and methods that conduct such integrated analysis, which is the need of the hour. There are limitations, as I said. The analysis uses very high-level data sets due to lack of spatially explicit, high-frequency data at lower resolutions. This is for India. We are developing or scaling down for the state level, and the analysis also assumes that nations are very homogeneous, which we all know they are not. This is granted. And there is, the inability is to currently disaggregate results at subnational level, but we've gone down to the state levels, and the goal is to move ahead and also further disaggregate at the district level, but due to lack of data, there are some limitations on that. And we look at certain policy priorities, but we know that this is possible and doable, but how do we reach that level is something that the analysis still falls short of currently. So that is it. You can find me here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vartika. We will entertain the questions at the end. The next speaker is Anisha Gunaratna. Anisha is a research associate attached to a Colombo Urban Lab, and also she is working with the Institute of Development Studies, United Kingdom. And she is going to talk about a different story about Colombo, maybe different scene that you will see, understand from the nutrition point of view. And she's going to talk about food environment in Colombo from a fresh perspective. Anisha.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anisha Gunaratna, and I'm a research associate at Colombo Urban Lab. Today, we'll be sharing some research that Colombo Urban Lab did together with the Institute of Development Studies as part of the FRESH initiative. Whilst I'm the only one here presenting today, this research was truly a team effort, and I'd like to take a moment to credit and acknowledge the hard work of the team involved. As part of our research, we sought to understand how working-class communities here in Colombo experience their food environment. Drawing from the definition of Turner et al., we take food environments to be the factors that influence food consumption and acquisition in the context of the broader food system. So that means factors such as prices, availability, accessibility, and product properties, vendor properties, to name a few. For us, this really meant understanding the daily lived experiences of communities and vendors to understand what produce they have access to, how they make decisions around food, and ultimately what they consume. As part of our research, our methodology took an integrated approach of stakeholder consultations that formed our collaborative needs assessment, and that ultimately formed our research instruments to use in the study. We had stakeholder interviews we had household and vendor interviews. We did vendor mapping, geospatial mapping of vendors, as well as participatory photography using the photo voice methodology. And we also used the workshops as part of the photo voice methodology for us to share our findings and recommendations with the communities and to amend them based on their feedback. We were in the field from about July to October of last year, and we selected 30 households from 2 areas in North Colombo, from both a watta, or a settlement as it's called, as well as high-rise housing complexes for low-income families. The 2 sites, as you can see, Totalanga and Wanatumulla, in this map of Colombo, are located about 6 kilometers away from each other, and one, which was Totalanga, was adjacent to a large public market or a puller, and the other one had access to vendors and informal vendors and shops in the vicinity. Sampling included households with and without children, with pregnant and lactating mothers. We had multiple follow-up interviews with these households during the course of the research period. We also mapped all the vendors within a 75-meter buffer zone of both these communities, and then selected 20 for in-depth qualitative interviews thereafter. The final stage of our research included us taking the families that were part of the interviews and having a participatory photography workshop with them, where they were asked to take pictures of their food environment based on themes that we derived from the household interviews. This followed the photo voice methodology, and I'm glad to say that the majority of the photographs used in my presentation today are actually from the community members themselves. Our research found that families have a really good understanding of nutrition and have access to a lot of fresh produce in their neighborhoods. Prior to COVID, families were eating well. They had a food plate that consisted of rice, vegetables, fish, meat, eggs, and even fruit. However, now, families are mainly consuming rice, vegetables in small quantities, foregoing vegetables, fruit, and their proteins. And this we've seen have impact on both health and nutrition indicators. The image here shows us how the food plate has changed from pre-COVID till about the last time we were in the field to about October of last year. But our ongoing work shows us that despite food inflation decreasing and despite availability of produce in the market, families still haven't recovered to eating how they were prior to the crisis. Our research highlighted that the factors that shape the food plate, or the factors that shape what people eat, go beyond just price alone. It is a whole complex interplay of factors such as quality and freshness of produce, infrastructure, interaction between the school and the home, health and NCDs, trust and interpersonal relationships, and the impact of multiple crises since 2020 that have impacted these families. The first is quality and safety of produce. Quality plays a key role, and it's mainly determined by perceptions around freshness as well as contamination with chemicals. Families highlighted that they would rather not buy produce at the end of the day, despite the price being much less, because they weren't sure that the quality at the end of the day was good enough. We see here Shamila, who says, "A fruit shop at night. Although it's near our home, we do not buy fruits here, as we are not sure if chemicals have been injected." Another key area that stood out for us was infrastructure, and the infrastructure nutrition nexus. In the home, infrastructure can determine what is bought, the method of preparation, and even the utensils used to prepare the food. Given the increasing electricity tariffs since 2022, the gas price increases as well, families are now spending a significant portion of their income on infrastructure, with much less to be spent on food. Over 90% of Colombo's working class poor are actually connected to the national grid, and disconnection for the grid is something that is just not possible for them because it decreases their quality of life. And so now we see families choosing to try their best to stay connected to the grid and to also pay these high utility bills. This includes taking high interest loans or even pawning assets just to be able to manage their expenses. We've also seen them unplug time-saving electric devices such as rice cookers and fridges, and also choosing to cook items that don't take up as much cooking fuel and moving away from items such as manioc and chickpeas that are both time and energy intensive. We see here Nirosha choosing to cook a variety of leafy greens because they're both time and energy intensive. The next is the interaction between the school and the home, and the school midday meal program plays a key role here. Families in Vanathamunla and Thotalanga both send their children to government schools. However, for a majority of these schools, they don't have a free midday meal program. As a result, families are often required by the school to send a nutritious meal, which is often monitored by the teachers. The problem here is that these nutritious meals are not only expensive, they're often time and energy intensive as well. On days that families can't send a nutritious meal to school, they usually keep their child at home in fear of them being reprimanded if they are sent to school without a nutritious meal. For schools that do have a school midday meal program, we've seen how families are more incentivized to send their child to school, as well as the positive health indicators that have come as a result of the school meal program. Colombo has a high rate of non-communicable diseases, and this was something that was evident in our findings as well. Many of the families we interviewed had diabetes, but at the same time, they also had a very good understanding of nutrition and were consciously trying to change their diets to eat food that was good for their health, and that also reduced the severity of their NCDs, such as not eating certain items, such as beetroot and pumpkin, or certain varieties of fruit that may worsen, due to the perceived sugar content that may worsen diabetes. You can see here Sharmila choosing to buy food that is good for her health in general. The trust that consumers have with the vendors they buy from also play a key role. And you see them choosing to buy from vendors who they trust sell produce that is not contaminated with chemicals. Even at a household level, despite the constraints of the crisis, we see households sharing food with other families, even those who are less vulnerable. Within the home, we see the care that is extended from mother to child in an attempt to cook food that the child has a preference for, and also foregoing nutrition for themselves as long as it ensures a good nutritious meal for their child. You can see here the top two plates have an egg cut in half, and the plate at the bottom represents the one of the mother because she has given the one egg that they could afford to their child. Finally, as I mentioned before, our research at that time could not be extracted from the broader context of crises that have impacted Colombo's working class poor since 2020. We've seen families take on a whole host of coping mechanisms, and all of this ultimately impacts the food plate, whether it impacts quality, diversity, and even with certain families reducing the number of meals they're taking a day. Despite these hardships, food continues to play a role that goes beyond sustenance alone, where it represents community, identity, and care. So to conclude, I'd like to spend a minute or so kind of wrapping up the key implications. The first is on the methodology that was used for this study. We were able to get such an in-depth understanding of the complex nature of what determines what families eat because of the integrated methodology that we took. The in-depth, deep ethnography coupled with the vendor mapping and participatory photography really gave us a nuanced view of what people eat and why they eat it. The second implication is to do with policy interventions. As I shared previously, families have a very good understanding of what a nutritious diet looks like and had access to fresh produce, even for the community that wasn't located next to a public market or a puller. The problem here is that families cannot afford a nutritious meal because they either cannot afford it or have competing costs. So what do policy interventions in a country that is looking at economic recovery really, what should we be prioritizing? We believe firmly that our policy recommendations from this research need to look at the context that food is embedded in, and that means understanding the social, cultural, and economic landscape. We need to move firmly beyond just considering communities as receivers of food or nutrition information alone. Policy interventions need to look beyond the food plate. For example, taking into account the broader constraints on the household budget. Social protection can play a key role here. And for example, expanding the school meal program is one way that we can ensure healthy food for children and also help us on the journey towards making meaningful strides in improving nutrition for these communities. Our research also highlighted the critical role that informal vendors play. Policy interventions shouldn't look at formalizing their arrangements, rather giving them better support to help them succeed. This can look at the increase of public infrastructure such as bathrooms, taps, expansion of streetlights, and also access to better affordable and inclusive financial solutions. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Our detailed findings and recommendations can be accessed via this QR code. We're also having a learning lab tomorrow at 3 p.m. that will go through our integrated methodology in more detail, as well as the photo voice methodology too. We also have an exhibition which features more pictures from our research, so please do take the time to have a look. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anisha. So now we're going to move actually to the School of Food Environment with a talk from Nandita Samad from King's College London. She's a PhD candidate, and she'll be talking about co-identifying actionable priorities for designing school-based healthy eating interventions for adolescents in urban Bangladesh. So welcome, Nandita.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my presentation today. So I will be talking about part of my doctoral research that is from King's College London, and this is the final phase of my PhD. To give you a brief idea about what I'm doing, so my PhD project has 3 interconnected studies, and which underpinned the current study that I'm going to present today. So the first study is the umbrella review, which I just published, and I found that the individual level and system level interventions, when work in combination, are more effective rather than the individual level intervention in school setting. And I also found that there is a significant gap of stakeholder engagement in the research process. Like my previous presenter, Anisha, said, like she involved participatory action research involving all the participants within the research design through photo voice. I had a similar kind of methodology, which is concept mapping. And also my qualitative study, which is the second part that I presented last year in this conference, there is this one theme that is policy gap, which explored the geographical disparities in Bangladesh within the policies and interventions, which mostly focus on the rural areas, the rural schools, and the rural schools are more enrolled, resulting the urban adolescents quite underserved in this regard. And another thing is the key stakeholders also mentioned that the adolescents are not part of the intervention design. So we involve them in focus groups to explore the drivers of healthy eating, but we don't actually hear their voice while designing the intervention. So based on that, I had this research question in my mind, like how could we design a policy or an intervention in school setting which is more tailored by meaningfully incorporating the voices of all the key stakeholders and particularly the adolescents. So my objective was to engage the key stakeholders in identifying the actionable priorities for designing the intervention, and finally to have them together in a webinar to co-identify the actionable priorities which are deemed most important and most feasible. I started with stakeholder mapping using a World Health Organization stakeholder mapping tool. And I had 2 schools from Dhaka metropolitan cities in the urban areas, one private and one public. And I recruited the stakeholders using that tool based on their level of priority and level of influence. So I had adult stakeholders representing the ministries in Bangladesh, some very important NGOs and international organizations, and school authorities like head teachers, class teachers, regular teachers, and parents, and also adolescents aged between 10 to 19 years. I had a total of 48 stakeholders in this study, 28 adolescents and 20 adult stakeholders. So my methodology is informed by Trokim's concept mapping approach, and it has several stages until I finally co-identify the actionable priorities. So it starts with the brainstorming phase. So where we have a provocative focus prompt. For my study, it was like to promote healthy eating in school in urban Bangladesh, we should ... So the participants had to fill in the gap by brainstorming, and I had 3 distinct participant groups because I conducted single-gendered workshops with adolescents, boys and girls separately, and one with adult stakeholders. And I also had one-to-one session with the key policy experts who were willing to participate but couldn't join physically. So I had a total of 263 verbatim statements, and then I refined by deduplication, and the final number was 141. The next phase was to structure the statement. So here the participants were given some cards of the statements, small cards, and one envelope. So there they could cluster those statements according to their similar conceptuality and could put inside an envelope and label it according to them. This workshop has also a separate segment which is rating so we had the statements and they could rate it based on importance and feasibility from 1 to 5, 5-point Likert scale. So from not important to very important, not feasible to very feasible. The third phase was the analysis, which I did in R programming language using the RCMap package. So the most important 2 analysis was multidimensional scaling and hierarchical cluster analysis, which finally produced so many interesting graphs, but I'm just presenting the few important ones. So as I had 3 distinct groups, so I had 3 distinct cluster maps. So adolescent boys and girls had 6 clusters. So the clusters contained the statements of similar conceptuality, and the adults had 8 clusters. Very predictably, both boys and girls prioritized the technology-based intervention components as they're mostly important and feasible, but the adult stakeholders chose canteen goals as the high priority cluster. And then I did the analysis statement-wise to see what could be the components. So here I will give an example of one goes-on plot. I had 3 for 3 different stakeholder groups. So the right upper quadrant are the ones which had high feasibility mean and high importance mean. So altogether I had 57 high priority statements, which are the actionable priorities. And like for girls 20, boys 21, and adult had 16. So finally, I had the utilization phase where I go back to the participants, and it was a hybrid webinar with the representatives of each stakeholder group, and some policy experts joined online. And the adolescents chose to present their prioritized statements through posters. And it was a rigorous discussion, and through consensus, I finally came up with 7 actionable priorities for designing the healthy eating intervention in school setting. And I synthesized the findings, the actionable priorities, using 2 frameworks. One is World Health Organization's health promoting school framework, which had 3 components: health education, school environment change, and family engagement. So I had 4 in this health education domain: the health eating app to track or monitor their consumption, which would finally give a score about whether they're eating healthy or unhealthy, and then some health eating projects in the science fair, as they said, peer-led activities, essay competition, and some culinary activities, and one-to-one nutrition consultancy. For school environment change, I had a very interesting canteen enhancement facilities. They talked about including meat analogs, nuts, fruits, and buy one, get one offer in the canteen for healthy foods, nutrition designed menu, and also replacing the soda drink with organic fruit juice. And also poster display around the school for having the information on healthy eating, unhealthy eating consequences, and food labeling. I had one component in the family engagement domain, which is the interactive workshop with parents regarding food plate portioning or visual or a virtual grocery store to give them an idea about food labeling. And the second framework I used is the behavior change taxonomy. It has 16 taxonomies, the BCCT, but here with my findings, I could integrate 3 of them, which is the feedback and monitoring comes under the healthy eating app. And I had 3 with the associations, as you can see in green, which are like having the changed environment structurally. It could be physical or it could be social within the school area to facilitate healthy eating behavior. And the rest 3 in yellow were the antecedents, which are like introducing some kind of stimuli within the school environment to cue healthy eating behavior. So yeah, this is the last slide. So I would say the implication of this study would be to how to co-design and healthy eating intervention or any kind of health intervention through participatory action research, which is the main focus of my PhD. So it doesn't have to be a healthy eating intervention. It doesn't have to be in LMICs, because participatory action research is very much popular in the high-income countries. And it has this bottom-up approach, because mostly in LMIC, we overlook the participants, and the interventions and policies are like top-down approach, which are expert-driven, but we need more like participant-generated approach, so we can hear their voice, what their perceptions are, and what they feel about it, to make the interventions more feasible, more tailored, culturally appropriate, and more sustainable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandita. Trying to connecting the dots across the system, especially in the related to the school food environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to have the last presentation for the session. The title is Dietary Choices and Food Environments in Rural South Asia. The speaker is Alka Chauhan. And the speaker is affiliated to International Food Policy Research Institute.
Minute click practice. Going well. Is this working? Yeah. Hi everyone. So last in connecting the dots across systems, I will bring together information from a household and market survey to describe food environments in rural South Asia. I have done this work with my co-authors listed here. In rural areas, the landscape of food environments is rapidly changing. As households' wealth rise and the food industry expands into these areas, the food environments in rural communities experience transformations. This is different from urban centers, which is already saturated with both healthy and unhealthy food options. And as we witness this shift in rural areas, it presents us with a unique opportunity to study how emerging food environments may influence diet. So there's also a big research gap, particularly in South Asia. We keep saying that, and we do not know a lot about food environments here. So this study is an effort to understand food environments and how food environment indicators like affordability, accessibility, availability, and desirability are linked to food consumption in some rural districts of South Asia. So let's look at the data that we use in this study. So under TAFSA, Transforming Agri-Food Systems in South Asia, we collected data from 5 districts from Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. And from the household survey, we have data for 4,000 households, where we interviewed 3 individuals, 1 adult male, 1 adult female, and 1 adolescent, could be male or female. And the data was collected between February and April 2023. Alongside the household survey, we also conducted a market survey in the same study areas. So to give you an example, this is an example from the district of Nalanda in Bihar. And the green and yellow points over here, are markets and shops, and the light black outline are the study villages. So when I say study villages, I mean that the household and market data were collected from these villages. So we collected data for 2173 vendors, 1600 retail shops, and 210 market managers. And we will be using this data to answer these research questions. What are the characteristics of food environment in rural South Asia? So here we try to answer, are healthy foods visible? What types of unhealthy foods are sold? Do vendors report barrier to market access? What % of household respondents see ads on unhealthy foods, and where do they see them? And in the later part of this study, we will see how do affordability, accessibility, availability, and desirability of healthy and unhealthy foods relate to the consumption of these foods. So starting with the first research question, we mapped the 5 districts to show some of the indicators that characterize food environment. So each diamond on the map here, it represents a village. For indicators that will be in the columns, there are more. So each indicator is divided into tertiles, hence you will see a low, medium, and high gradient. And there are blue points that represent nearby major cities and towns within each district. So starting with the first one, fruits and vegetable visibility. We define it as vendors who place vegetables and fruit in front of their store or outside the store. Basically, that is more visible to consumers. So here we can see that visibility is high in Bangladesh and Nepal, and also high visibility is concentrated around cities and towns. Next, we look at what is sold in the markets. I'm sorry, it's a lot. So for this, we took all the foods that were being sold in the markets, and then we characterized them. We characterized the sellers in the market. So for UPF sellers, we took all the sellers that were selling chips, biscuits, toffees, chocolates, etc. For Western fast food sellers, we took sellers that were selling foods like burgers, sandwich, noodles. Traditional food would include some foods like paratha, dal puri, etc. And lastly, fried snacks would be deep fried snack sellers like samosas, pakoras, etc. So from these maps, we can see that UPFs are in, that's panel B. Okay. That's not working. Okay, so that's panel B. And from UPF, we can see that it's widely available across all the districts. And we can see that Western fast food sellers are majorly present in Nepal and are also concentrated around cities and town areas. Fried snack sellers are moderately present, and traditional fast food sellers have more presence in the Bangladesh districts. Those are on the top. Last, we have barriers to shop access. So these are physical barriers reported by the shop owners. So for example, shop is away from a major road, or the opening time of shop is affected by any natural disaster, etc. So the shop access barriers they were quite low across all the districts, but they were relatively high in the Bangladesh districts. Next, we move on to the second part of the first research question, and we look at exposure to advertisements on unhealthy foods. So we asked the respondents if they have ever seen or heard advertisements on unhealthy foods. If yes, for what foods and what source? So here we see that the exposure ranges somewhere between, in the first panel, we see that the exposure for any unhealthy ad ranges somewhere between 30 to 40%, and most of the ads were seen for soft drinks. We also plot the exposure by wealth, and we can see a clear gradient here in the bottom panel. So households with more assets have high exposure to unhealthy ads. Next, we also plot the source of these ads, and it was mostly media for all the districts. In India and Nepal, we also saw that ads were visible through shops, and we also plotted media by wealth, and we do see the same gradient intuitively. So households with more assets see more ads on unhealthy foods through media. So from here, we move on to our next research question. We will look at how do affordability, accessibility, availability, and desirability. So these are different aspects of food environment, or if I may say external food environment, relate to food consumption. But first, let's look what these are. So desirability. Food choices of an individual are driven by their cognition. As an individual, we like to eat what tastes good, what looks good, and more. For affordability, individuals should have enough income to be able to afford diverse and healthy food. Accessibility, individuals should have convenient access to safe, diverse, and healthy food options. And lastly, in availability, there should be year-round availability of diverse and healthy food options. So keeping these definitions in mind and the data that I showed earlier, here are the indicators that we choose to represent each of the food environment. So for desirability, we're using messaging on healthy, unhealthy foods. This was reported by the respondents. For desirability, we are also using a non-poor proxy, which is almost at the cusp of desirability and affordability. For affordability, we are also using local market prices. This was measured through the market survey. For accessibility, we use proximity to market. This is shortest distance to a nearby market. This we measured using GPS coordinates. And lastly, for availability, this was reported by the respondents, availability of 7 sentinel foods that could be dal, green leafy vegetables, biscuit, chips, etc. So here is the estimating equation. I will not complicate it a lot, but just to quickly explain it. So food here, food F will be 25 different food items. We will see what are those food items shortly. We use the FFQ, food frequency questionnaire, to ascertain the weekly consumption of each food. So here we are saying that weekly food intake, food F, is a function of price, distance, availability, advertisements, and wealth, all the food environment indicators that I just talked about. And we mutually adjust all the food environment domain indicators and other covariates, including age, sex, and district fixed effects. So let's look at association between food environment indicators and food consumption. To give you a perspective of what these coefficients actually mean, we are looking at weekly consumption. And a coefficient of 1 approximately translates to consuming 1 time in a week. So the reds are negative coefficients and blues are positive. Starting with accessibility, we can see that the remote communities, the ones that are farther away from markets, consume less of rice and fresh foods, but more of fish. For availability, we see that high reported availability of foods in general relate to higher consumption of unhealthy foods. That's the block at the bottom. For affordability, where we use the market prices, we see that cereal, tomatoes, tea, and coffee, all the darker reds, are price sensitive. And lastly, on desirability, we can see that richer households, desirability that we are representing by non-poor and ads. So we see that richer households consume more of all foods except for rice. So to summarize what we learned about food environments, we saw that UPF's traditional fast food sellers and fried snacks are widely available. Households with more assets are exposed to unhealthy ads through media. And in the second part, where we saw a relation between affordability, accessibility, availability, and desirability with healthy and unhealthy food consumption, we see that unhealthy food is strongly linked to availability. And in relatively poor households, cereals are price sensitive. Lastly, as wealth increases, both healthy and unhealthy foods become more desirable. I'm happy to answer any questions. My email is here in case I'm not able to answer in the Q&A round. Thank you.
Thank you, Alka. You can stay, Alka. Can all the speakers come to the front for the Q&A? Everybody stayed very on time, so we have lots of time for Q&A right now. So I guess there's a couple microphones around the room, so if you have a question, perhaps you could go to the microphones and state your name and your question. Anybody have any questions? Oh, thank you. You wanna? There's some microphones around the room, but I'll bring you. Yeah, if you guys, there's one mic here where Olivier is going, and another mic behind the cameraman in the middle. If you want to go there, but I'll start with this gentleman
here. Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting and insightful presentation. My name is Javindra Bandari. I am from Nepal. I'm a student of public health and anthropology. I have two queries. For the first, the Anishaji, and another is from the Bangladesh, Nanditaji. Yeah. For Anishaji, I think your presentation is very much on the broader context of food environment in Colombo. I think it provides a very comprehensive overview of how food environment is shaped by lots of other contextual factors. You highlighted a little bit of the social, cultural, and economic context in the later part of your findings, but I couldn't see in the methodological part you try to relate on that. I think it is already there so far, I assume. In addition to that, my curiosity is maybe what are the intersecting social inequalities, particularly in terms of gender, in terms of cultural values, in terms of overall socio-political context and all these things. And the within the families and within the households, how communication, interpersonal communication, you highlighted on the school and family and kind of this connections, but I would be very much interested how the communication within the families, is shaped by, the broader context of the social or cultural or, indigenous context. Have you looked into that? What are your insights to that? This is for Anishaji. And for Nanditaji from Bangladesh, I really liked, as an anthropologist, I'm really overwhelmed, and I'm really glad that your approach is more on the stakeholder engagement and the engagement kind of things. And from methodological perspective, the concept mapping approach is quite interesting for me, and it is quite new for me, and I really appreciate for that. In the context of your methodological part, I was wondering whether you have some ethnographic field research, like the participant observations or any other mappings you have already, and other in-depth interviews or kind of things, observation and all these things. I would be interested to explore what kind of other methodologies you were engaged in that process, because you try to look at all the engagement of the adolescents and all these things, or the study participants. How can this concept mapping approach facilitate that process from methodological perspective? What is the added value on that? I think your insights on that would be very much helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pass it to Anisha first. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. I'll start maybe with the first part and segue into the second. I think our research really showed us that there are an interplay of roles, and in both factors as well as the different roles members in the family play when it comes to determining the food plate. And I know you touched a bit on intersectionality, and that's something that we were focused on in our research as well. And gender, for example, plays a key role. Across the households, it's mainly the women of the house who we're seeing doing the purchasing, the cooking, all the care work in terms of looking after children. And what happens here is when you have an impact on one area, for example, your electricity tariff hikes have increased twice or three times over in the span of a year. Families are now unplugging washing machines, fridges, and that means that women are having to spend more time on cooking, they're spending more time on care work, and ultimately that impacts the food plate of these families. In terms of the kind of decisions that go into making food, obviously it's a whole host of factors, but we see the role of the children and how that really determines, because once again, the mother really wants to give the child what they want. Prior to COVID, families used to say they'd love to give their children things like Pizza Hut because that's what they really enjoyed eating, but now they can't afford to do that. So you see all of these decisions that, and all of these different roles that play a key role in determining what families eat. And I think you had a question in terms of, I had made a comment on this, the broader kind of social, economic, cultural. And just to speak to that a little, I mean, even if you look at certain Muslim families that we interviewed, they said that on Fridays, on the days that they go to mosque, they'll like to have a good meal, and as a result, maybe on Saturday and Sunday, they'll have a food plate that looks slightly different to make up for the fact that they had a slightly bigger meal on Friday. That is very much part of their cultural context and what they're embedded in. And I think the point we were trying to make is you can't extract the food environment from all of those features.
Thank you so much for your question. So I would say an ethnographic study would be really interesting to do, but due to the time's constraint, I couldn't explore much, but I had a qualitative study prior to this concept mapping. So there I explored the drivers of healthy eating in both rural and urban schools, and also involved the key stakeholders as key informants. And I did a reflexive thematic analysis, which was very rigorous. And the theme I presented here, the policy gaps about geographical disparities, is one of that themes that came from the analysis. And also in that study, I had researcher-generated photo-elicitation method, which is a little opposite to the photo voice, which is participant-generated. So I had researcher-generated, so that was a participatory method within my qualitative study. And the concept mapping one, which is very, I would say, which was very tight according to this Trokim's concept mapping methodology, which was informed in my methodology. So here I couldn't actually involve other participatory action, but within the workshops, I couldn't show the slides or the photos. There was also a touch of photo elicitation, like to stimulate the participants, to help them brainstorming while generating the statements. So there I presented the findings from my qualitative study, the drivers of healthy eating, like increased accessibility to fast foods, and the school food environment, what's being sold in the schools, and the vendors that are standing outside the school gate. So all these were presented to them to help them brainstorm like how we could address this and promote healthy eating in the school. And would also like to mention, in my qualitative study, I didn't have observation particularly, but I had I had taken the field notes, so it was kind of a non-participant observation while conducting the focus groups, and also taking field notes from the school food environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we can entertain more questions at the front.
Yes, thanks for taking my question. My name is Olivier Ecker. I'm Senior Research Fellow with IFPRI. And my question goes to my IFPRI colleague, Vatika Singh. So that was a very nice presentation. Thanks for that. I've been wondering how you factor the costs of or the affordability of a diet, as well as consumer preferences in your modeling framework. Because obviously it's one thing to, from a modeling perspective, to force consumers to consume a certain diet, and really capturing food preferences as well as income and relative food prices. Related to this one, I was also quite puzzled by your statement that you showed on your slide that household food choices is driven by cultural factors. I would argue that especially in the context like India, that perhaps incomes or poverty, as well as food prices, may matter more than potentially cultural factors. And I think my argumentation is justified by the high prevalence of poverty, of malnutrition, and also by studies like by our colleagues Derek Hady and others that show that the cost of an affordable diet is extremely high in South Asia as well as in India. So how do you connect the dots?
Okay, thank you for the excellent questions, Oliver. So the first bit around preferences of diets, as I acknowledge in the limitations, the modeling framework is unfortunately unable to account for preferences of individuals. So we force the models to say everyone is just eating the healthy diets that we are recommending. Now, the one cost aspect of the affordability and cost here is that because these models are also economic models and they factor in market prices. So when, and there's also global trade. So it's, I show results for India, but India is not isolated, it's in a global setting. So we have trade of a lot of food products based on changes in demand. So not in this particular analysis, but I have done some other work where I've simulated variations in change of specific food groups, but also their market prices that affect. So on a aggregate level, we are able to show in another paper that food prices do not change much on an aggregate level. Again, at the individual consumer level, we cannot say that. But for a specific set of food groups, they do not change much. And in the long term, by 2050, food prices are even lower for certain food groups that continue to be produced much higher in a global trade setting with that assumption. Now, there are a lot of policy pieces that may or may not fit. So we cannot necessarily say that what the model is saying will eventually happen in 2050, but the model dynamics eventually bring us to that level in the long run. And we can deliberate in detail over the findings of those. And the other point on cultural factors, we can also have a discussion on that, because I think affordability, absolutely, and we have some research by our own IFPRI colleagues, but also other colleagues in India who have shown that more than 2/3 of the people cannot afford the healthy diets that are recommended by the Eat Lancet Commission. In the analysis that I've been doing and I've been working on, I include dietary recommendations by the India's National Institute of Nutrition, and in the current modeling setup, I'm able to show that not by 2/3, they will still remain unaffordable, but given if at all, because this is an idealistic modeling scenario, if everything would be put in place and come together, we should be able to afford healthy diets that are recommended by the regional institute. And again, cultural factors, yes, but also affordability. So I don't think it's one way or the other. It's a mix of both in various regions. It's very, very heterogeneous, and we cannot say that in one region this is the major dietary factor. It's possible, yes, but there are also occasions, there are crises, there are situations that force people to consume what they consume. And I would say there's a mixed evidence on that. And again, we can continue to discuss that later.
But I mean, coming back to the price issue, I mean, I don't know how you predict prices over the next 20 or 30 years. I think not even, it's even hard to predict prices for the next week or so, right? Or for months or a year time. And if we talk about prices, it's not the absolute price, it's a relative price, right? Because consumers decide between different products given a certain income level that they have available. Right? So, and then you make a choice based on your preferences and your food availability, right? So hence, if you do not consider those things, I mean, just shooting straight to the stars, not sure if that is a good capture of, human behavior.
Which is why I said all models are wrong. Yes.
More than others.
So market dynamics, definitely. So we cannot say for sure, for certain, that this is the value of 1 kilo of rice in 2050, absolutely not. But in an equilibrium modeling approach, we can say, based on market supply and demand, this might be the equilibrium price around this range. The final price that consumers pay is absolutely very different from globally determining prices. So there is no comparison on that. And there are some models who are trying to capture some of that aspect too. But I mean, this is the best we can do given the data that's available. There's OECD, FAO, all of these make price projections, food production projections. Even we are able to do climate impact projections as well. So we just work with what we have.
All right, let's
continue.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Olivier. So we have a few more questions. Please come to the microphone if you have questions.
Right. So
We'll take a couple of questions. Please come to the microphones, and yes, we'll get everybody who is at the microphones. All right, yes, please go ahead, sir.
good morning, distinguished guests and the panel. My name is Samarth Kashyap, and I am a co-founder of a digital innovation company from Delhi. I personally would like to ask Alka and the panel, as somebody from non-research, so please bear with me if I have some question which might not be appropriate. But with respect to your research, you're talking about the affordability of the diet, which is healthy and unhealthy, and how that impacts the populace of these three countries, India, Nepal, Bangladesh. I was wondering, apart from affordability of unhealthy and healthy diet and the advertisements which are there on boards, TVs, and whatever, what factors, like for example, does taste play a role, and how can we improve that? Because if we want to have the populace eat more healthy food, how can we bank upon taste factor? Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just reading out few virtual questions so we don't miss out on them. So there are two questions for Anisha. One is that was the dietary diversity of households or individuals assessed? The second question for Anisha is, could you elaborate if you plan to take these evidence forward in terms of communicating to policy makers into actionable policy interventions? So those are two for Anisha. There's one question for Alka. Based on your findings, what recommendations would you suggest for engaging the private sector in driving changes in food habits? And then there is a question, we don't know who it's addressed to because the participant didn't mention. It says, in Sindh, Pakistan, food security faces critical challenges due to the contamination of essentials like milk and excessive use of chemical pesticides in agriculture. Given the alarming rise in malnutrition rates, what proactive measures can communities adopt to mitigate these issues and ensure access to safe and nutritious foods for all? These are the 4 online questions that we have right now.
I think we can answer those questions and go to the other.
Okay, so I'll answer the first question regarding taste. That's actually an excellent question. So we do have, in the survey, we do ask the respondents if they like the taste of particular food item, and we do factor it in, but due to limited availability of time, I couldn't show that model. So there's another model that comes after this where we try to show the diet quality using a GDQS metric. And in there, we factor in the perception towards taste of a particular food item, which could be healthy or unhealthy. And we do see that there is association between diet quality and taste. I hope that answers your questions. And regarding the private sector, so we have seen that availability and desirability is affecting both healthy and unhealthy food. And we've seen that advertisements is also, so in the advertisements part, we did take 2 aspects. So for healthy foods, it was messaging on healthy foods, consuming diverse diet, not consuming unhealthy foods, and the messaging on unhealthy foods. So from the model, we did see that availability and desirability is affecting the consumption. Is related to a higher consumption of both healthy and unhealthy food. So from private sector perspective, what we can say is that if there is messaging on healthy foods as well, and not just on unhealthy food, and not only private sector, we try to put down ads that are about unhealthy foods, but instead of that, if we try to promote ads or information that is more about healthy food, that might help us, help the people consume more of healthy foods.
Thank you. I'll start off by answering the first question on whether we measured dietary diversity. So actually, since 2020, we've been in the field also with Institute of Development Studies on another project called the Living Off-Grid Food and Infrastructure Collaboration. And through that project, so through 2020 onwards, we've been trying to get an understanding of what people are eating. And through that project as well, there were multiple follow-up interviews, and we were able to pretty much map how the diets of these working class poor families changed from pre-COVID to COVID to the economic crisis, and that's also how we were able to see how increases in electricity, for example, impact quantities of what people were eating, or the certain items, for example, of what people were eating. So long answer short is yes, we have that data, and actually the illustration of the food plate that I had in my presentation is actually reflective of this data. The second question around policy priorities and whether we're working to push this agenda forward. of course we are. We're working with the local government, especially the public health department of the CMC. We've had multiple conversations with them to see how we can utilize our research to help them and their midwives and their PHI officers in the field. We've also been talking to other development organizations in trying to share our research and to push, for example, the expansion of the school meal program. And we've also been working with other partners, really, and hopefully now with the new government and their focus on eradication of food insecurity, we're hoping that this will also be another avenue for us.
Yep. Can I give the chance to the lady at the middle? So there is a microphone at the middle of the hall as well. And then we come to
Thank you very much for the excellent presentations. I'm Shampika, research officer from Hearty. When we are framing our...
Can you speak to the microphone?
Hello. When we are framing our study about adolescents' exposure to the unhealthy food in Sri Lanka, we face a very big problem because of the unavailability of a concrete definition of unhealthy food in Sri Lanka. Actually, we even contacted the Ministry of Health Nutrition Division, and they also haven't had a concrete definition for unhealthy food. And when we hear the phrase unhealthy food, what comes to our mind is like junk food, but it is very difficult to demarcate which is healthy or which is unhealthy, because if you take even a piece of sandwich, one sandwich could be at a healthy end, but another sandwich could be at a very unhealthy with a lot of trans fats and low amount of micronutrients and fiber and so on. So I would like to know from, especially from the colleagues from other countries, regional countries, whether you have a concrete definition for unhealthy foods in your countries, or how do you deal with that question? Thank you.
First of all, I think Anisha can give an answer, because you look at the healthy, unhealthy foods in that environment. Your definition, or how did you define, and then others can also give an answer.
Sure, happy to take a stab at it. Our study mainly focused at fruit and vegetable consumption, so that was really the main kind of focus. But through our interview, especially with stakeholders, I think one thing that came out was the high prevalence of sugar, whether that's in cold drinks, whether that's in icy popsicles that a lot of children have during the hot season. So that was something that came out quite a lot. We didn't really delve into the definitions of healthy versus unhealthy, and also keeping in mind this research was conducted at a time where families were just trying to get a nutritious meal on the table. So that didn't really come into the context of it, but I'd like to pass it over to my foreign colleagues who might have a better definition.
Yeah, so regarding defining healthy, unhealthy, you rightly said that there is no clear demarcation, and sometimes consumption of some foods in high quantity could also mean unhealthy. For example, sugar, sometimes red meat. So yeah, in the study that I presented, we did have clear definitions of what we are calling unhealthy and healthy. But in the same survey, which I used for the study, we have this, like I said before, we have this GDQS metric. This is Global Diet Quality Score. In this, it scores all the food items, so 16 food items on a GDQS plus, and then some unhealthy food items on GDQS minus, but then it also assigns a score. So it might not mean, so if you're consuming just like say half a spoon of sugar, then it might not reflect as unhealthy. So that is also another way to go about it.
Nandita, because you look at the school foods, so what's your idea about the healthy, unhealthy snacks?
Okay, so yeah, I explored this unhealthy and healthy eating behavior, but definition-wise, yes, when I did the photo elicitation approach, I had the participants having a list of healthy food and unhealthy food, and asked them to categorize those foods as healthy and unhealthy. And I found from them that they are categorizing the home-based meal, which are not like opposite to fast food or not energy-dense or nutrition-poor foods. So they are classifying them as healthy food, and the others like the junk foods or the street foods as unhealthy foods. So yes, it's from them, and I'm a nutritionist myself, so yeah, I would say those foods like which have all the nutrients, macro and micro, if eaten in moderate amount, would be healthy. So anything excess is bad, unhealthy, or anything like that is poor in nutrition would be unhealthy. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So we can entertain the last three questions. 1, 2, and the third person there. Sorry about. I think. Yeah. And please
Hello.
be very brief when you're asking.
Hello. Good morning, all of you. My question is very straightforward. In most of the South Asian countries, the common syndrome is that they have experienced very high economic growth, as well as they have experienced a significant reduction of the poverty. Despite the significant reduction of the poverty, the nutritional outcome are really very poor. That if you consider, say, India, as per a recent survey, the poverty level declined at a single-digit level. Around 10 to 15% percentage people are poor. But the nutritional outcome, so far malnourished people are concerned, their figure is nearly 40 to 50%. Why these types of mismatching are there? That means they have the affordability, but why they are not able to overcome the nutrition insecurity?
The next question.
Thank you very much. I am focusing Nandita Samat, PhD candidate. I appreciate your presentation. I enjoyed it. Your topics is very much time bound. Your school meal feeding for adolescents in urban Bangladesh. In urban Bangladesh, you mentioned adolescents, whether it is primary level or secondary level. Number one question. Second question, what are the current food items are given for school meal feeding, and what are their nutritive value? And you recommend widening of school meal. What do you mean by widening? It is number of schools or number of food items. We give school feeding for both regular performance, school performance and attendance, as well as nutritional correction, malnutrition. But due to some constraints in Bangladesh, at present, school meal feeding is stopped. Whether you consider the school meal, widening of school meal, is it not the factor of overweight and obesity to some extent? Please clear it. Thank you.
So the last question over there.
So I really appreciate, good morning everyone. So I really appreciate all the speakers presented here, who have presented here. So my question is not really a question, but a thought process in the perspective of street vendors. When we are talking, as most of the speakers have speaked about the street vendors, so do we have a chance, or do we have a look that if the street vendors are empowered and they are being not into the violence part of it, especially the female street vendors, women street vendors. So, and we can see the variation. If they are empowered, they have the proper document, and they have this. They might be providing a better dietary plate to ourselves than those who are not empowered. So that variation is, can we see, or is there is a possibility that we can look to it? It's just a thought process. Thank you.
Okay, the speakers can respond.
directed to you. Yes, very quick. Thank you. So the first question on incomes have risen but not nutritional security. I think that's the point of this entire conference. For 3 days, we are going to discuss precisely why that is happening. And I'll just give the small example of India. It's not just malnutrition, it is also a problem of obesity. So we've also seen that over the years, incomes have risen, and so has the numbers of obese people. And the global burden of disease figure that I just showed, diabetes is also one of the largest factors of burden of disease in India. So people are consuming, they're just consuming too many of specific goods, which is processed foods and high fat, salt, sugar, as we like to define it. And of course, the problem of malnutrition cannot be ignored, and there are affordability, a lot of other factors that are also play a role. There's no one single answer to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So my PhD project is actually about healthy eating behavior. So in my study, I didn't actually look at the healthy meal. So there was no school meal intervention in my study, but I know what you were asking, like, is it primary or secondary level? So I had the adolescents in the secondary school level. Yeah, that was your first question. And the second one, regarding school meal, I know from the literature that there are some school meal feeding. There were ongoing in the primary level for the primary students in the school, not for the secondary. And there was, within the school meal, I think there was protein biscuits. So the only nutrient I know so far, there was protein biscuits distributed in the primary schools, mostly in the rural and suburban areas. So my study is actually not like addressing the individual level factors, like not only school meal, but how we can do something to change their behavioral pattern. So just school meal won't have much impact on their behavior. So that's why there should be both individual level and system level intervention components that can work in a combination to change their behavior. So it has to be a multi-component intervention. So there will be like canteen implications, like providing nutritious foods in the school or school meals, and also like healthy eating apps within the curriculum, or one-to-one nutrition consultancies, and also engaging the family members throughout the intervention, so, and educating them about healthy eating. So there's a balance in school and as well as in the household food environment, so that can impact their behavior in a positive way. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for your responses. I think we'll go ahead and conclude. Sorry, the time for the session is over, but I think the speakers will be available all day, so feel free to speak with them, at the breaks or over lunch. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer more questions. I'd just like to thank the speakers for your wonderful talks. I mean, I think we've heard a lot today about, all the different drivers of diets and poor dietary choices and what may be causing those problems. And I think the issues, that were outlined, around affordability, availability, desirability, and accessibility are all very clear throughout these presentations. And I think you have to, address all of them if you want to make substantial changes in people's diets and associated nutrition behaviors. But we have to do this by also managing trade-offs, which I think was very clear in the first talk today. But I think the solutions are, they're out there, but whether or not, how they can be implemented, which ones are the right ones, I think also takes the, the voice of the people that are most affected. And I think that's also something that came out very clearly through the talks today. But then we also have to figure out how to actually do it, how to afford all the interventions and programs and policies that are likely needed to address the problems at hand, and then how to manage, some of the potential negative trade-offs that might, come about after, foods are more affordable. I think Kanisha was giving an example of people wanting Pizza Hut, if they had more money, and that's probably like a negative outcome of some of those positive changes that we might see. So I think there's a lot to do, and I think the speakers today presented a lot of good information about kind of both what are the drivers and some of the possible solutions and how to create robust solutions. But now it's up to all of us to kind of continue to figure out how to do it and how to implement these changes along with the program implementers and policymakers around the world. So thanks so much, and I think this will wrap it up. I think I'll hand it back over to Isha for the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, the chairs, Tiana and Dr. Silva. Thank you, all the presenters. Can you please come in front for a group photo? We will now break for tea, and after the tea break at sharp 11 a.m., we will come back to this room for the thematic session on why we eat what we eat, drivers of food choice. And we will go, and those who are interested in the parallel session, that is 3B, which is happening in saffron and ginger, titled Examining Linkages Between Climate Change and Food Systems. So 2 sessions happening from 11 to 12:15. One here on the drivers of food choice, and the other one in saffron and ginger on linkages between climate change and food systems. After that, we'll break for lunch and then come back to the thematic sessions, again one in this room on social protection, and the other one in saffron and ginger on gender and social inclusion. Followed by learning labs. You all know the drill by now. That will take place in the 3 rooms, one here, one saffron and ginger, and the other one in room tamarind. And at 4:30, we all will come back to this room for the final keynote plenary session for today, which is on breaking norms for better nutrition. So see you all at 11 a.m. for the thematic sessions. Thank you. Enjoy your tea.